I want to play with kids who might only be into hardcore for moshing and riffs, so that I could possibly put a little nugget in their brain of like how we can make this scene more than that.
Doggo is sleeping and we are recording. So awesome. Well,
my dog is also sleeping next to me.
Right. I have seen some stories on your end where it's just like, I don't know if he's gonna get up, but yeah. Usually my dog is all the way down here. Sometimes he'll make an entrance and go out the back. But anyways, thanks everyone for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. Today we are bringing on Kat from the band FAIM. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this has been a podcast idea of mine for a long time, as Bert and I from Safe Inside Records have chatted a bunch, and he's said nothing but good things about you, and obviously your band slaps. So we're definitely going to be very excited for the conversation today. As far as where you guys are based, I might have missed that. You guys are from Denver, Colorado?
We're based in Denver, yeah,
Gotcha.
But I'm the only one who doesn't live there anymore. I live in Tacoma, Washington.
Oh, I got you. So a little bit of a distanced band in the works there. Yeah. For those listening, because this episode is going to come out a little bit later, but we're actually recording this on the day that Joe Biden has, locked in or claimed the president-elect. I think there's a lot of people that are stoked about that, and I knew the conversation that Kat and I were going to have was going to be very political, but this seems like a perfect timing for a lot of those things. So before we get into it, got to do our bev check to kind of set us off. So I had all these like cool ones in my fridge, but it is a blisteringly cold day here in Calgary, so I just made some chai tea with some oat milk. I'm going to plug my friend Lauren, who's our local ceramicist here. We buy far too many things from her. So she's from Seed to Tree on Instagram.
Very cool.
Yeah. What about you? What do you got on your end?
It's also cold here today, so I have hot chocolate in my Dough Donuts mug. It's a donut shop in Portland. All vegan donuts. It's amazing. My friend Andrew designed their logo, which is super cool.
Yeah.
So if you're ever in Portland, Oregon, don't go to Voodoo, go to Dough Donuts. You will not be disappointed. So I just have some hot chocolate to keep me warm today.
Nice. Do you want to read what's on the side for anyone, the listeners who can't see it?
Sure. It says, "Go vegan, stay vegan, eat donuts."
The trinity of of all things in life.
The whole reason why I'm vegan. Vegan donuts.
Yeah. Well, Kat, I'm very excited to be chatting with you today. I've been jamming the Hollow Hope LP in the last few days, kind of prepping for this podcast. Before we get into, I guess, the current nature, I always like to get context about all my guests, how they got into heavier music, how they got into punk and hardcore. So take me back in time, give me the Kat hardcore origin story, and let's start there.
Yeah. So I grew up right outside of Chicago in Northwest Indiana, and I had an older sister who was punk and got me into punk pretty young. I was in like middle school when she got me into punk. And like the first show I went to ever with her was, I got to see Jawbreaker when I was like a freshman in high school. And so I was really into punk. I got really into, emo, like the Get Up Kids and Braid and Alkaline Trio and all of that. And I started getting interested in hardcore. I was pretty unaware of like subgenres within punk, at least until I went to college. I thought it was just all punk, which it is, but I didn't know that there was like hardcore and metalcore and like grind and all of that. And so the first hardcore band I actually really got into was Snapcase.
Okay.
Um, well, I should say it was actually by the grace of God. And then I got into Snapcase kind of based on that. And I loved Snapcase. And from there, I kind of ventured into more of that like melodic metalcore, I guess. I'm not like a heavy metalcore person, but like more melodic stuff.
Sure.
And I moved out here to Washington. I went to college in Olympia and I started going to shows up in Seattle. And I went to go see the movie Life one time and they had just gotten in like a van accident. So they weren't there, but the tour was with Bane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was, I think it was before Give Blood came out. It was well before Give Blood came out. And I had never heard of Bane. I didn't know much about like hardcore. And I was just kind of like blown away by this scene that I had like never experienced before. And so I just started getting into more hardcore bands. I met some kids who liked hardcore and they introduced me to stuff. And so Seattle was like where I first really got into hardcore and going to shows and moshing and singing along and all of that stuff. And then I moved to Boston in 2003 and interned at Bridge 9. And so I was like in the thick of it during the most perfect time to kind of be in Boston hardcore. Sure. I saw American Nightmare, I don't know how many times, and Suicide File, I don't know how many times, and HopeCon and all of those bands. And so it wasn't until I got to college that I like started understanding what hardcore was. And so it's been like 20 years now that I've been into hardcore. I kind of dipped out for a little while, a little bit after Have Heart broke up. I had my own band in Boston. And when we kind of stopped playing, I just kind of took a break from the hardcore scene. I had moved to Connecticut and like wasn't as close to Boston and shows in Boston anymore. And then when I moved out to Colorado, I started really getting back into the scene. So that was like 2015.
You've kind of been all over the country, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have.
Yeah, and I think that there's there's times of I don't think, I don't want to say like true believers or keepers of the faith or anything like that, but like people that are really into this, even if they need to have a break from playing in bands, touring, things like that, it's natural to always come back to.
Yeah.
For myself, I grew up in Winnipeg, which is like the dead center of Canada, and then when I moved out to Calgary here, I was so busy with filming shows that I didn't have any wanting, at least for the time being, to start a band. And it was only within 2 years of being here that I was like, okay, I gotta be on the other side of this. Was that like when you kind of went from Boston to Connecticut and then Denver, kind of the same thing where it was like, you know what, I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna, unplug, but I'm gonna, not be as active as I once was.
Yeah, for sure. I had really just started like focusing on my career and just like wanting to put more time and energy into that. I was getting my master's degree and things like that. And so there were just other things that took up my time. I was married at that time too. And my partner, who I met through hardcore, had kind of drifted away from hardcore. And I had kind of gone with him. And then like when our marriage dissolved, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm just not happy because this isn't who I am. Like I'm a punk at heart, and like hardcore is a huge part of who I am. And so that was part of it, was just like kind of transitioning into my life based on my partner at the time. Sure. And realizing we had grown way apart in who we were. And I wasn't happy being not a punk, I guess.
but like you were saying, the fact, and I remember when I was watching your prom course set, you had mentioned, yeah, I've been in hardcore for 20 years, and I was like, wow, like, but no, that's I think it's cooler to say I've been doing this for 20 years versus like I did it super hard for, my 2 years, like my
Mhm.
early 20s, and then I just, because some people get into this where it is kind of a fad or a trend, but they
Yeah.
don't see the long-term
Yeah.
marathon aspect of it. And
Yeah.
it is an obsessive nature with a lot of people.
Oh,
So
for sure. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that that's how it was like I got really into hardcore when I lived in Seattle and when I moved to Boston. And then I was like, I need to do more than just go to shows. So I started a band, and there weren't a lot of women in the Boston hardcore scene at the time. And so I was the oddball for sure. But it was fun. And then I took a break from that because it just wasn't the same. And then when I moved to Denver, I wanted to find that scene there, find the punk and hardcore scene there. And when I did, um, I was super happy to be able to connect with people. And I think that that's partly why I love this scene so much is that I've moved to cities where I've known nobody, and I'm able to make friends pretty easily
right,
because of the people in the scene. It's such a community.
right.
And so um, I decided to start FAIM. It was right before the 2016 election. And so that was a huge part of it was, well, there were kind of two parts to it. It was the fact that like I knew Trump was going to win the election, and the fact that he was even nominated was insane. And then that summer, everything had come out about Jim Hesketh. And there was a lot of talk about like just kind of the dominance of men in hardcore, the misogyny in hardcore. And I was just like, I don't want to just sit around and like talk with an inner circle about this. I'd like to be able to talk more about it. And then the other part was like, I had felt from my perspective of what I was seeing that hardcore wasn't as political as it used to be. It was a lot about like just moshing and heavy riffs, and that's fine. But I missed that part of the scene being political.
Yeah.
So that's why I got back into it. Yeah.
Yeah, when I mentioned watching that Hate 56 set and set that's hard alliteration at times. Hate 56 set, but you were mentioning on just like hardcore need like we have a job to do more than just punching our
Mhm.
friends essentially,
Yeah.
and I was just like wow like that, and I agree that and I've had this conversation with other people up here in Canada where there's bands that just like write and their intent is just to be as belligerent and
Hmm.
ignorant as possible for people to act that way at their shows. But
Yep.
not a lot of people, at least in the call it the popular sphere of hardcore, currently are writing stuff that's like, oh man, I never thought about that before, or like
Hmm.
that perspective on this issue is really refreshing to hear.
Yeah.
Um, and to kind of backtrack a little bit, it's interesting to hear how FAIM started around, I guess, 4 years ago, when Trump was kind of assuming this role of the country. And I'll say this now: anyone who starts a band during COVID is not a COVID band. I think
Yeah.
I think people will see shifts in the world, and that will trigger like, hey, I've wanted to do this for a long time,
Yeah.
and this is the catalyst for that. It's not throwing an extra unnecessary label on it. But um, so like I was saying, you guys kind of started that, and you wanted to make a shift in the more political conversation. So maybe this is a little bit of a fast forward, but you guys recently dropped an album on Safe Inside called Hollow Hope. So what are some of the themes that you wanted to make sure that you hit on like you guys I can't remember if that's your first release on Safe Inside, but
It
having a
is.
little bit more push than maybe previous releases.
Yeah, yeah. It is our first release. It's our first full length. It's the first full length I've ever done, which is really exciting. And so when we decided to write this album, a lot of what I wanted to write about was political. I had been reading The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And I highly recommend that book to anybody. It talks a lot about the systems of racism within the United States, particularly mass incarceration. And so the title of the album actually comes from that book. But at the same time, we were going, I was, like many people were going through this kind of, I guess, like existential crisis of some way, where we were seeing everything that was happening within our country because of Trump. We were seeing a rise of white supremacy, at least like outright white supremacy. It's always been there, but just the fact that people felt comfortable enough to come out and talk about it, and feeling pretty hopeless about the state of the world in general. And so, a lot of the album ended up being about like my own mental health, and just kind of what I was going through, in the last year and a half of trying to cope with being such an empathetic person that I felt very hopeless about what I was seeing, and also feeling the urgency to do some direct action, especially as a white person. It isn't about me being, feeling sorry for myself. That's something that I think a lot of white people can do, is be very woe is me right now, when really it has nothing to do with us. I understand that I'm a woman and I'm oppressed in that way, but I'm not oppressed like women of color. And so, it was kind of all of that, of like, how do I find the strength to do more, and have hope in a very hopeless time. And so that was where a lot of the record went. And then like half of the record ended up being politically driven. Division Avenue is about the city I live in, Tacoma, and how, we have a very racist history here. It's still a pretty racist city. And and then a few like, Bastards is about, a lot of people think it's about cops, but it's actually not. It's more about kind of the government and like, organized religion. I based it partly on Handmaid's Tale, which is one of my favorite books. And just this idea, I based it on Handmaid's Tale, and I based it on what's been going on in Hong Kong, which is what ended up, I feel like we have a lot of parallels to Hong Kong now in the United States, of what is happening with protests. So, it wasn't as political of an album, but I feel like that it's definitely more genuine, because I wasn't so driven to be like, all right, this song is going to be about this topic and this song is going to be about this topic. So, but I do think our mental health has a lot to do with politics. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I was literally texting someone before we jumped on the call, like how insanely stressful of a week it's been, as far as like checking the polls and like seeing the reports and what people are saying. So, and like you were saying, as a white person, we have this level of stress, but then like, people of color, trans people, women, like the stress levels of tiers go up from there. So like I said at the beginning, I think a lot of people have a little bit of a sigh of relief, but at the same time, there's hesitancy of like, okay, like what happens next in between the shift of the seat. I was thinking about this, because and this is a pretty interesting question and conversation, but just like on the idea of, hardcore overall has been, like have these unsaid shared viewpoints of like inclusivity for all, taking no shit when it comes to people that are oppressing people, or support white supremacy or things like that. But this is a question I had, as far as like, is hardcore as a genre only have one viewpoint politically? Because then it becomes like, okay, well, if it's all the people in the same room have the same, or blue or red or whatever, and I'm trying to keep this as open for the Canadian and international listeners as well as the Americans. But you know, like has that something that you've wrestled with as far as like, okay, we like everyone at this show, like 99%, you know, including that 1% person, all believe the same thing, but I actually don't know if there are Biden supporters or Trump supporters in the room. So what are your thoughts on that matter?
That's a really good question. First, I'm going to go back to what you said about like how hardcore in general tries to be an inclusive, talks about being inclusive. And I would respectfully disagree with a lot of that because I think that it's talked about, but it isn't always
not in practice,
put into action.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so politically, though, I would agree, right, that for the most part, hardcore tends to lean to the left. There are definitely conservative people and right-wing people in hardcore. I see that. I know that because in talking to one of my friends who is in like a prominent hardcore band, and when he posts political things through the band Instagram or Twitter, the reactions he gets from some people show how many conservative people are in hardcore. I think the internet is a great place where you can see how many incels there are in hardcore, right? Just the way that, I mean, you go look at the Hate 5-6 video with a woman in the band, like Brothers Set got posted and somebody wrote like your typical gym hoe about Heather. And so like, there are those people, there are a lot of those people in hardcore. I tend to think that we as a band probably play just because of who we are and the fact that we are so outright about who we are. We play shows that tend to be people who think more like us. And we aren't even like, our band isn't even like, we're not Democrats, we're not Biden fans at all. We're just happy Trump is out, but we know how much more work needs to be done. But I think we've probably played bigger shows where there have been people who don't agree. You know, we played with Sick of It All, and I'm sure there were plenty of old dudes in the room who didn't agree with what I had to say. And I don't care that they don't agree with what I have to say. And I think that those are the people that I want to talk to and I want to play like that. I'm not one of those bands who like only wants to play to other punk kids and DIY venues and not play with beat down bands. Like I want to play with kids who might only be into hardcore for moshing and riffs so that I could possibly put a little nugget in their brain of like how we can make this scene more than that. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it becomes this, you know, weird thing where you see, you know, I remember when, you know, and this is an S tier level band, but when Black Sabbath did the Black Lives Matter benefit shirt and it was with the purple squiggly text, just the amount of people that came out of the woodwork and was just trying to throw them into the wood chipper as far as like, oh, keep politics out of your music. Yeah. Like, have you listened to Black Sabbath?
Yeah, right.
Same thing. I think earlier today or maybe last night, I saw a video of a very, I'll say, dressed up Trump supporter singing Rage Against the Machine. And I was like, what is going on? Like, yeah. So do you think that, you know, and I've talked with other people on this podcast where that there are times where you can see just outright, just like, I have deaf ears and anything you say is just going to bounce off. And then there are opportunities where someone might just be a little bit ignorant and you can, you know, have a fruitful conversation around them.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Has there been anything at a FAIM show where, you know, it was you know, someone came up to you politely and talked to you about things and you had a discussion?
Not politically. No, nobody's come up to us and had like a political conversation with us. I can think back to that Sick of It All show though, where there was this like older gentleman. He was probably like 50. So he wasn't that much older than me. But he kept calling me sweetie and darling and stuff like that. And so I had like a conversation with him about like how that made me uncomfortable. That's not the way that you should be addressing women. And he was really understanding of that. And I think it was very much kind of a generational thing where like that, I mean, that's how men used to act in hardcore. And so, so not politically, but there have been those moments where I've interacted with people who aren't as knowledgeable about kind of how to interact with, you know, me as a woman in the scene, and they have been kind about it. I mean, but I've also had moments where I can think of, not even at a FAIM show, but I was at a fest in Atlanta during Gorilla Biscuits, and there was this kid purposefully crowd punching women, and I said something to him, and this other kid came over and was like, "This is a hardcore show." And I was like, "Dude, I know. Like, I've been to a lot of them." I was like, "It's also Gorilla Biscuits." And he pushed me. And I looked at him and I was like, "Don't push me." And he was like, "You need to get out of my face in 3 seconds." And he counted to 3 and then he pushed me again. And I was like, is this real life right now? Because this was 4 years ago. And somebody like grabbed him, and then he goes, "Whatever, you fucking cunt," really loud, and it was quiet. And so everybody heard. And I was just like, but I had this, and so he got dragged out, but I had this moment where I felt guilty, like I did something to start shit with him, and I didn't.
Yeah.
And so that is something, I know I'm totally straying from the political part, but I do think like feminism is part of that, right?
Sure.
Where as a woman, I have been, you know, brainwashed in a way to think that if I've upset a man, I must have done something to upset him. And I hadn't. And so there are definitely, I mean, maybe I don't see people who are racist or you know, things like, you know, things like that within the scene, but there are definitely still very sexist men within the scene. And so that was such a reality check for me, having come from Denver, where I feel like when I go to shows there are just as many women as men. There, you know, like our scene is very diverse, to a place like Atlanta where, like, while it was a fest, it is the South, and maybe it isn't as welcoming, and maybe that is how women are still treated. And so
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot to break down, and like you said, like we're kind of jumping all over the topics here, but as far as like, you know, hardcore being inclusive, but like
yeah
a lot of times that isn't put into practice. Like you were trying to
yeah
put that into practice where it's like, hey, I see the shit that you're doing, it's sus,
yeah
you got to stop that. And
yeah
I, you know, 4 years ago isn't a long time,
yeah
and I believe that, you know, if it was a guy stepping in and be like, okay, dude, yeah, whatever. But you know, it's just sad to see. And I don't know if you know All Gas No Breaks or know who that is. So
no
Andrew, okay, you definitely need to go after this podcast. Everyone
okay
does. So he is this this up and coming YouTube I would say interview entrepreneur. So
okay
he'll go around to the Trump rallies, to the Minneapolis riots, and interview people on both sides, and like just like edit it in one of the most comical ways possible. But he travels with his homies in an RV all over the world, and all over the country, I should say. But one of the podcasts I listened to had him on as a guest, and that's how I found out about him. And I was listening to one of their other episodes just a few days ago, and just because of how rural that he got to go in some places, he's like, yeah, I think Trump's gonna win, just because if you're in like a hub like Las Vegas, everyone's like, oh yeah, we got to get this guy out of here. But as soon as you go out into the country and like different thing like that, it's just a sea of Cheeto supporters, which is just so crazy.
yeah
But like you were saying, just like you know, girls in hardcore is something that, you know, I remember you talking about on the set about how that has come. Things have come a long way since you started getting into hardcore, but there is still a lot of work to be done. You know, was trying to think of the good questions for this podcast, and sometimes I question is someone who maybe doesn't have this experience of like playing in bands or things like that, is it on guys or men who do have like, musical I don't want to say musical because there are a lot of girls that I know that have been playing guitar or bass or things like
Mhm.
that. So do you think it's a matter of like asking or allowing people to start things on their own? Because I've seen it both sides where someone was like, I joined this band for the first time because someone asked me to. And
Mhm.
on the other end of things, like I started this band because I wanted to see more women fronting bands. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that matter?
Yeah. I started FAIM because I wanted to see more women in the scene. Um, I think it's both. I I don't think it should all be put on non-cis men to be like, I'm gonna start this band because, you know, I want to see more non-cis men in the scene, because not everybody is like that. Not everybody is a leader in that way that they're just gonna go out and do that. I do think part of it is put on men when you are starting a band, to maybe diversify who you put in the band for a couple reasons. Number one, like, I know it's fun to start a band with all of your best friends, but like maybe we can like reach out to different people within the scene and make it an even more unified scene by having a band that isn't just you and your group of best friends. Um, and, you know, it's, I do think it's up to men to be like, how can I have different perspectives within this band other than white men? And so I didn't even, I kind of went on a rant on Facebook, which I've stopped, but I went on a rant on Facebook about, how I'm tired of seeing labels that don't have women, or they have like a token woman, or fests that have no, I mean, there are still fests in the United States that have no women. And, um, and my partner, Joey, was like, well, maybe it's actually on the men in the bands to like expand who they have in their bands. And I was like, that's a really good point. And so I think, I do think part of that is that because the scene is still so male dominated, it's hard to find women or any, non-cis men to be in your band, especially, I'll say hardcore. I won't say punk. I feel like punk is pretty diverse, but hardcore itself, I feel like because it's still so male dominated, it can be hard to diversify your band. And so I think part of it is like us figuring out how to make hardcore not as male dominated. Um, and so I think it's both ways. I don't think it lays all of the fault or all of the duty lays on either
Yeah.
group of people.
Yeah, and I think like change doesn't come in a blink of an eye. It takes many
Mm-hmm.
years. As long as we are trying to get at it every year
Mm-hmm.
to see that change, I believe in 5 years time there could be just a plethora of more girls in bands,
Mm-hmm.
more non-binary folks in bands,
Mm-hmm.
more people of color in bands. Um, but yeah, I do think that is interesting. But I think you know it's almost about the ratios too, because if there is a if you have a bucket, not even a bucket, I don't want to use that term, but if you have all the bands that have a female doing vocals or something of that nature, um, and you listen to all of them, you spent like an entire week, you would be like, okay, I like these ones, I don't like these ones. But if you went on the opposite side of the coin and you listened to every band that was only white dudes,
Mm-hmm.
and there I feel honestly that you would have a lot more bands that you don't like than
Mm-hmm.
just because of the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I firmly believe that I think seeing those opportunities to you know, if someone has an interest to do something, be like, hey, I'm here to support you, whether it's
Yeah.
like playing guitar or like, hey, like let's put this band on a show. You know,
Yeah.
it's the little opportunities and jumping on those for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I had to swig the tea. So this is a overarching question as someone
Okay.
who's been in hardcore for 20 years. You know, I'm trying to remember exactly when I can say it was like into the core versus just into like DIY music. But
Yeah.
I guess I'm like close on like maybe 10-ish. But you know, for you, what is the biggest positive change that you've seen in this time? And what do you think has been the thing that you feel like we need to focus the most on?
Oh man, that's such a
It's
good question.
it's a big question, so
Oh,
take your
it's a
time.
big question. Just from my own experience in hardcore, I do think the biggest positive change I've seen is how welcoming the scene has become towards women, and that we are looked at as just other hardcore kids, and it's not you know, when you go to a show, because when I first started going to shows, it's like, oh, there's a new girl, let's see who can try and date her. And it's, I feel like what I see, at least with like the younger kids that I see in the scene, it isn't like that, and that's awesome to see. The biggest thing we could work on it's probably still that piece of being inclusive. So while women, I think, are being treated better at the majority of shows, it's still a boys club. And so I was having this conversation with my friend Heather, while it feels more positive in that way, we are still excluded from the scene in this kind of indirect way. So the best example I can give lately is like the new Eco Strike record. There are like 2 songs on it where he talks about brotherhood. And right there, I was so just turned off by it, because I was like, well, that doesn't include me. And so it's those little pieces where it's like, how are you, how, and a lot of people, when I talk to them about this, they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. But it's like that type of language, it's almost like a microaggression in a way, where women don't feel included in what's being talked about. Or what's being like, I don't think I could sing along to Eco Strike, right? Or like a song that talks about being brothers, because that doesn't include me. And so that right there shows me that while I'm sure the intent wasn't to exclude women, the impact was. And it shows me that still the majority of your friendships are men. And I think that that's something that I've always had a lot of male friends in hardcore. And I think I would like to see men have more female friends as well, because then they might think about those pieces when they're doing things like writing lyrics. So, yeah.
That's actually such a huge point. I never thought about just like the song titles, album artwork, names, lyrics. Like, you know, I had someone on the podcast who, you know, he was joking about how he would say ridiculous mosh calls like, who's got the biggest dick in the pit? But like you were saying, that immediately excludes all of the sick female moshers that, you know, largely and it's such a weird thing where it's like, I'll go to a video either on Hey56, my channel, 197, and just everyone's like, oh, this chick that grabbed the mic, she should be in a band. It's like, yes, but like, why are you saying that? You know, it's such a weird thing navigating that. Like you said, like the intent wasn't there, but historically right now, like we need to be a lot more thoughtful of the words and how we address certain things. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
for sure. Yeah. And I was having this thought recently because I think a lot when I'm in the shower, like most people do.
Oh,
And
I
like,
think hot water pelting you in the face is like it's the reason that that showers started scoped exposure. I was like,
that's awesome.
what if you had people across Western Canada film it? Like, it's
Yeah.
the best place. But anyways, I cut you off.
um, I was thinking about like youth crew and like straight edge and stuff like that, and how I've never really been into youth crew, and I never really was like, while I would claim edge, I was never like I'm straight edge, because I feel like I just saw such within that scene. It was just so like there was so much machismo that I was just like, I can't relate to this. And so, that's like when people talk about youth crew, I'm like, I don't like youth crew. They're like, how do you not like youth crew? And I'm like, because I just don't feel like it's written for me. Like there's nothing in it that makes me feel like they're talking about me. And I think that's true for a lot of straight edge too. Like I love Have Heart because Pat like doesn't just talk about straight edge. He talks about so much more. And it's like, I don't know, that's just when people talk about like, I think about those like straight edge interview things and they're like, what are your favorite straight edge bands? And I'm like, I don't even fucking know what are my favorite straight edge bands are, because it's just not something that I've ever felt like I was a part of. So
Yeah, and no, I think you hit on a great point as far as like allowing bands to write about different things like
mhm.
Mortality Rate, which is a local band here in
Mhm.
Calgary, not a vegan band, but on
Yeah.
the on You Were the Gasoline just wrote a vegan song. And I thought that was
Yeah.
very cool that, members of that band, whatever their diet or
Yeah.
restrictions or whatever, allowed her to write that song to express that. And,
I love that.
yeah,
That's
definitely.
awesome.
Um, yeah, and I think it is, as a scene as a whole, it's you don't have people on stage being like, "Yo, I know there's a lot of vegans in the room, and I'm gonna go and have a burger." Like, I think that there's a lot of, unsaid but thoughtful respect of like,
Hmm.
okay, like here are the things that we should be talking about on stage and on the same and no, like maybe I can't speak for vegans as a whole because I'm vegetarian, but if I'm at a show and someone's talking about how this insane ribeye that they had the other night, I'm not like, oh, I'm not safe here or anything. It's just like, oh,
Yeah.
that
Right.
dude
Right.
is a bloodmouth or whatever. um I'm sure some vegans might get mad at me because like you can't say that because you're veg. Um, so this is a complete shift in topics.
That's fine. Go
But
for it.
I always like to connect some of the interest that people are in hardcore to the music genres and kind of like bridge a gap between those two. So I know that
Okay.
you're an avid hiker.
I
Um,
am.
yeah, and it's funny. I am not the outdoorsy type myself, but marrying someone who is very active and especially moving to Calgary, we are like 45 minutes away from the mountains. So has that always been in your life as far as like being in? I guess probably not because being in different places around the world, it was only until you moved to Denver that you're like had mountain access. So talk to me about that.
That is pretty accurate. Yeah. So growing up in Indiana, Northwest Indiana, I could go hike in the cornfields. But I was not really an outdoor. I was always active. I played sports and stuff. And then when I moved to out here, originally go to college, I did not care about the mountains at all, did not care about Mount Rainier. I just wanted to go to shows and be in cities. And the same, like when I moved to Boston, I was like, cool, I'll go look at the pretty fall leaves. Like that was a huge reason why I moved to New England, but I wasn't like a hiker
Right.
at all. And then when I moved, when I moved out to Denver, well, before that, so like a couple of years before I moved to Denver, I had to go to Arizona for my cousin's wedding. And so we went to the Grand Canyon,
Okay.
and that just changed everything for me. And I was like, oh, I'm so tiny in this big, beautiful world. Look at all this beautiful stuff out here. And so then I like when I decided to move out to Denver, I did a giant like 2.5 week road trip, and went to a whole bunch of national parks. And so I still wasn't like super into hiking. I was like into seeing pretty things. And then when I moved to Colorado, I was like, I'm going to get into this hiking thing. And so I love it. I love being in the mountains. I went to Mount Rainier, I think like 6 times this summer. I did like 19 hikes this summer or something like that.
Crazy.
So, and it's like a big mental health thing for me. Like it is huge for my self-care, like getting out into the mountains or anywhere and hiking, and remembering like the beautiful things that exist, in our world. But the mountains, there's just something so special about the mountains. And so yeah, that habit of mine, that addiction of mine is only about 5 years old or so.
Yeah. No, it's pretty funny because, being from Winnipeg, any Canadians that are listening, that is the flattest part of Canada. So like, moving out here, and I came to Calgary for the hardcore fest that happens here and shows and this or that. So I was just blown away that it's like literally on my drive to pick up my wife, I can see all the mountains on a clear day. And people that grew up here are just like, yeah, I haven't been out to Banff or Canmore in like a couple of years, and we're out there so often. We're actually going to Jasper this weekend. But no, I think it is huge as far as like, whether it's the Grand Canyon or the Rockies or whatever, just seeing how massive these giant rocks are and just like how insignificant and small you are. And especially like, you get out to some of those things, you don't have service, so you can't just be mindlessly scrolling on your phone. So there's a lot that goes into rejuvenating for someone, for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
We went to Glacier this summer, and it was the most beautiful place. Well, I think Mount Rainier is the most beautiful place I've ever been. If you ever have the chance to go, there's a hike there in the summer, that you should do, called Summerland, and it's just like unreal. Like I can't believe it's real life. I mean, you live in Calgary, so it's probably nothing compared to that. But at least for America, it's nice. But Glacier was just unreal how beautiful it was. And so yeah, I don't take that for granted anymore like I used to.
Right. I have to ask this question, as I'm sure you've seen these people. What are your thoughts on people that have little boom boxes on their backpacks while they hike and blast
I fucking hate them so much. I hate them. I don't want to hear your dumb music. I just want to hear nature. Like put on headphones. Like I'll hike occasionally with headphones if I'm doing a hike by myself, if I want to listen to music or a podcast. But there was one hike we did in Colorado, in Boulder, which is like the college town there. And there was like a group of like 20 people, and they were listening to music really loud. And I was just like, you're ruining this whole hike for everybody else. Right. I hate those people so much. I wish they would go away. I'll be nice and just say go away.
Yeah, there needs to be some like, I totally get, you're going camping and you might need to have a call or, post something on Instagram at a certain time, but largely playing music while there are birds chirping and waterfalls is the worst in my opinion, for sure.
For sure. Agreed.
Yeah. What's one of the longest hikes that you've done in your lifetime?
Yeah, I've done like, well, I've backpacked. So I guess, like I've done like 15, 20 miles backpacking. But a day hike, we did a 13-mile hike at Glacier. That was probably the hardest hike I've ever done, but it was amazing. And it went to this spot that overlooked all of Glacier on one side, and then on the other you could see some of the glaciers themselves that are going to disappear soon, which is so sad. and it was really hot on the way down, and we thought we were going to die. And there were people who were like not prepared for that hike, who like were passing out and like laying in the shade and stuff. So yeah, so like day hike, I think 13 miles was the longest. I don't mind doing like 8-9 miles on a day hike at all. But backpacking, I think I did 20 miles in a couple of days. I'd like to do more backpacking, longer backpack trips. It's just hard with pets to do that. So yeah, I would like to do the Enchantments, which is in the North Cascades here. You have to like get a permit to do it. You can do a day hike, but it's really hard and really long. But I'd like to get a backpacking permit to do that, hopefully next summer or the summer after.
Yeah, I'm sure like, you know, this year is pretty funny because me and my wife will do a lot of camping over the summertime, but because people couldn't take their trip to Europe or go on tour, like everybody and their mother was camping.
Yep.
So yeah, I hope that, you know, knock on wood, that things are hopefully over the next few months transitioning into a point where just the true campers can be there.
Yes.
I literally we were camping and in Revelstoke, BC, and this guy, and we have like, we're very like how do I say this? We're very like humble campers. So we got our tent, we got our chairs, we're not super fancy, we cook our own food, blah blah blah. And this guy like rolls up in this giant RV, and I'm just like, you know, trying to be friendly or whatever, and my dog's barking at him, so I got to be like, hey, we're not assholes. But he was like, yeah, this is my COVID toy, and I'm like, all right, you're probably gonna sell this by the time this is over, but we'll just have to see. So, I wanted to ask too, is that something that FAIM and you guys would do on tour, or is that kind of like, do we have enough time to drive here and then do this hike?
Yeah, no, that's always something we want to try and do when we go on tour. We've done a little bit of hiking on tour. When we went to Europe, we definitely made sure we went to like some places we wanted to go to out in nature. And then we did a hike in Arizona on tour. We always want to do that. We camp and hike together all the time. Well, as much as we can now. And so that's like something that 4 out of 5 of us are into. And so if the time permits, then we'll do it. But usually there isn't enough time to go hiking or camping. So.
Yeah, sometimes it's rush to the venue, and sometimes it's a lot of I got 4 hours to kill. So it's a balancing act for sure. Well, Kat, this has been a really awesome conversation. It's time that we can start kind of wrapping it up here. The last segment that I always ask all my guests is for them to share a favorite mosh story that they have. So that doesn't need to necessarily be something that happened at a FAIM show, something that happened to you, something that you did. Whatever's the first thing off the top of your head is how we end things here.
Oh, my favorite mosh story is it's one of the times I got knocked out. It's the first thing that always comes to my head. There's a video on YouTube of it. It was, what was the tour or the show? It was Bane, The Promise, Comeback Kid, and I forget whoever else. But like Comeback Kid had just played Boston like 2 months before, and like nobody gave a shit about them except for like me and a couple other people. This was like right after Turn It Around came out. And then they came back like it was September. I remember it was September. And like all of a sudden everybody's into Comeback Kid. And I was like, what the fuck? Okay. And I was like moshing and singing along like I do. And it's funny watching the video because if anybody knows like Boston hardcore, there's like the Boston stomp, like everybody has their like square that they mosh in, right? And so it's funny to watch that in that video. And then they played, I think it was Lorelei, and I like jumped up on people and was like singing along and saw this person just come diving at me. And I was like, oh, fuck. and get knocked down. And I was just like, oh no. And on the video, you can see me just like walk up to the stage and just like put my head down and just stand there for a minute.
Oh no.
And that was like the third time I had gotten knocked out at a Bane show, always at a Bane show, never during Bane. And that was like the last time where I was like, that's like kind of when I ended my like moshing, stage diving, head walking career. Was after that, because I like didn't know what month it was. Like it was so bad. And like I have to say, like, my poor memory has everything to do with like the 3 times that I've gotten knocked out.
Oh, so you
Yeah.
think that played a part in
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Because the first time I got knocked out was Bane, Hatebreed.
man, what has
Poison
Bane
the
got
Well,
on Cat?
and One
Just
Piece
like
the Fire. And it was during Hatebreed. It was in Ventura, California. I got knocked out. I didn't remember the next hour of it. The group of people that I had gone with, I was like, I think I need to go to the hospital. I can't remember things. And one of the people I was with was like, but I really want to hang out with What Feeds the Fire. And I was like, cool, don't worry about me. And so, yeah, that's what I'm like. That was more important than taking care of me. And the second time I got knocked out was the last Reach the Sky show. And it was during Most Precious Blood. And I was just standing there watching, and somebody like spin kicked and kicked me in the head. And they brought me out to the ambulance. This might actually be my favorite knockout story. They brought me out to the ambulance, and I was like, they were checking my head, and I'm like, I'm gonna miss Terror. You have to let me go in. I have to watch Terror. And I guess I went in. I remember standing like on the stage, like I was standing behind Terror next to Ian from Reach the Sky. And I guess I was like singing along to all the songs, but I don't remember that.
oh,
And
no.
so the third time I was like, I think I'm done
Yeah.
now with this. And so now I'm like, I'm not a stage potato. Pat Flynn once told me that I'm an observer, a stage observer, because I always
Right.
end up like on the side or the back of the stage because I'm so scared now of getting kicked in the head.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think if you get knocked out at a show, you get the pass to be on stage for the
yeah, right.
rest of
Yeah,
the night. Not just like,
especially-
oh, this is my homie and what like, nah, fuck that. Only people that get the hard mosh to the head or whatever
Yeah.
get that privilege.
Yeah.
Well, that was great. One story actually turned into 3. So
I'm sorry.
no, I appreciate that. I had it once where I had 2 guests and then their roommates were in the back and they came on. So you know, so far the record for most mosh stories per episode is 4, but you're second place with 3.
Oh, pretty good for one person.
Yeah, definitely. Most with one person, I'll say that. Well, Kat, this has been really great. You know, I think a lot of the topics that we hit on are very timely, but also just, you know, even if someone's listening to this in 10 years, it's just as important to be discussing these things. The floor is yours for anything you want to plug, shout out, places that you want to send people after this podcast. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got a couple. First off, please support Safe Inside Records. It's the most amazing label. Bert is seriously the best. He cares so much about hardcore and diversifying hardcore and keeping hardcore political. Also, I started my own podcast.
Yeah, please plug that.
Called Double Dare Ya. It's available on Spotify. It's with one of my best friends, Sarah. She lives in England. And it's a podcast that's kind of giving a platform to women and other non-cis men in hardcore, how they've gotten into hardcore, as well as their activism outside of hardcore. Our next episode is up in like a week with our friend Kimberly, who, if anybody's ever gone to shows in the Boston area, she's the one who booked all of the shows at the Democracy Center, and she's super involved with prison abolition movements. And then the other thing, please donate donate to gasenate.org or .com. I don't remember, but so there are going to be 2 runoff elections in Georgia for Senate seats. And so if the Democratic candidates win both of those, the Democrats will have the majority in our Senate. We need that in the United States very badly. So please donate. Biden's going to win Georgia, which is insane. And so those candidates have a really good chance of winning, and we need to get the word out about it. So.
The link for that, I'll get you to send it to me so I can put it in the description and all of that. I forgot that we didn't even hit on that, but yeah, I'm following Double Dare.
There it is. It's so weird. I'm gonna Spotify.
Of course. Well, so I think a lot of people are getting into that game right now, and it's pretty daunting to get everything set up on the back end to post here and it goes everywhere. So I'm stoked to listen to that. I'll include that in all the release.
Thank you.
Definitely go listen to FAIM. I definitely want to echo everything that Kat has said as far as getting more political talk in hardcore and less about just what's the hardest thing that I can say into this microphone. So let's get back to the roots. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast and jamming with me. This has been a blast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.